So we learned a lot of the React basics in isolation. In this video, what I want to do is build a project because this will help you see all the different concepts you put together and how they interact with one another. So to do this, we're going to be building a to-do list. I'm modeling this after the to-do MVC, if you've heard of that. And I have pretty much the features that we're going to build out right here. So the first is an input box that we can add to-dos. And then we're going to be displaying those to-dos below, and then be able to click on them and then cross them off, and then be able to show the active number of to-dos. So for example, let's say we have 10 to-dos, 5 are crossed off, so then 5 are active. So we'll show the number, and then also be able to filter. So filter by the ones that are not crossed off, all of them, or just show the ones that are not crossed off yet. Be able to delete a to-do permanently, and then be able to delete all the ones that are complete, and then also only show this button or whatever when there is at least one that is complete. And then lastly, be able to toggle them all active or all complete. So those are pretty much the features that we're going to be adding to our to-do list. And actually, I would recommend to you, before you even watch this video, to pause it now and try building this out yourself. And then whenever you get stuck or you're able to complete it, come back and watch the video, see how I do it, and then you can improve on that way. So okay, let's go ahead and get started with this. So the first thing I want to do is step 1, which is to be able to input to-dos. So I'm actually going to create an input box. And actually, before we get started with that, let me just get you oriented. I just put to-do list inside of my app component over here. And then I have a to-do list app that I'm going to be, or to-do list component where we're going to build out this entire application. And I'm just rendering that right now, and I'm just doing a div for text. So the first thing I'm going to add is a new component here, which is going to be to-do form. And so in my to-do form here, what I want to do is I want to keep the state of them typing and then be able to submit a to-do here. So I'm going to just copy this right here, this structure, and paste it here. So let's go ahead and import React from React, and I'm going to call this to-do form. So I want to store the text that the user typed. So here I'm going to say state text, and it's just going to be an empty string. And then here I'm just going to display an input box. So I'm just going to render this in my to-do list real quick. So let's go ahead and get rid of just the text, and we're now going to render our to-do form. And so we just have now a text box here, and then I'm just going to add some placeholder text. So I'm going to say ... to do, or actually it should be ... afterwards. Alright, and then we're going to pass in the value here. So the value is going to be this.state.text, and then on change function we need to create. So I'm going to say this.handle change here. So let's create the handle change function. And we're going to use the same method we did in the form video. So we're going to take the event here, and we're going to say this.setState, and we're going to get the event and event.target and get the name of it, and set that equal to the event.target.value. So in that case, I just need to specify this guy's name, which is equal to the text right here. Oops, there we go. Alright, so now I can type, and it's going to be updating the state. The next thing is to be able to submit this input. So we're going to create this as a form, and we wrap it, and we're going to say on submit, and then we're going to create a function to handle that. So handle submit. There we go. And again, this takes an event, and we're just going to say event.prevent default so it doesn't refresh. And then here I'm going to basically submit the form. So in this case, to submit the form, we want to be able to create a new to-do and pass it to our to-do list up here. So we're going to keep all the to-dos in this state right here. So I'm going to say state to-dos, and that's going to be an array of to-dos. And by default, we have no to-dos. So this is lifting up the state. We want to keep the state in this parent component here. Alright, so I want to be able to give it a to-do text to be able to create a new to-do. So we need to create a function to be able to handle this. So in my to-do list over here, I'm going to say add to-do, and this function is going to take a to-do, and it's going to say this dot set state, and we're going to say to-dos. And now I want to add a to-do to the to-dos. So what I want to do is I want to take this array and add one to the end or add one to the beginning. So in this case, I guess I want to add it to the very beginning. So how can I do this? Well, if you are aware with JavaScript, you know that you can use push. So I could say this dot state dot to-dos dot push, and then add a to-do at the end there. But we talked about how you don't want to mutate the state, so this would not be a good way to do it. So instead of doing that, what we can do is we can create a copy of that array. So I could say new to-dos is equal to dot 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 this dot state dot to-dos. So this is something that I haven't shown before, and that is the dot 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 syntax. So this is a JavaScript thing that you can use. And right here, what this does is it's creating a copy. And let me just comment that out here so we don't crash the application over here. And what this does is right here, I'm creating a copy of this array, and I'm passing it to new to-dos. Now we can do one further, and we can add a to-do to the beginning. So we say add a to-do to the beginning of the array, and then copy all the values that are in the state to-dos already. So now we're going to add a to-do at the very beginning, and then we can just say new to-dos here and pass that to update our state. And now if we wanted to, we could get rid of this intermediate variable that we're passing. So we could just do directly that. So we're taking our current state, keeping all the values that we have in there, and adding a to-do to the beginning. So now I'm going to pass that as a prop. So I'm going to say on submit, and I'm going to pass in this dot add to do. So in my to-do form over here, I'm going to be able to call this dot props dot on submit, and this on submit function is add to do. So we want to pass in our to do there. So our to do is going to have 3 properties. Well, really there's 2 obvious properties, and we're going to talk about a third one in a second. So the first property is the text, which we get from the state. So whatever the user typed. The second is complete, and we're going to say false. So if you just add a to-do, it's not going to be a complete one, so we're going to say false there. And the last value is an ID. So we talked about before how whenever we want to map over an array of values or display an array, which we're going to in the future because this is an array of to-dos, that we don't want to use the index to be able to do that, to create keys. We want some sort of ID for it. So we're going to create an ID for this right here. So we're going to be using a library to generate an ID for us. Now we're going to be using a library called short ID. So we haven't actually talked about how you can add third-party libraries before, but I am currently in the root directory of this project, so Practical React, and I'm just going to say npm install, and now I can add a library. So in this case, we're going to add a library called short ID. This is a library that allows us to create IDs. So we're going to create an ID for our to-do with this. So if you run that, that'll go ahead and install short ID. I've already ran that, so I have it installed for me. And now that's added to my project. So what I can do is I can go to the top of my project here, and I can say import short ID from short ID. And now we can say short ID.generate. And now what that's going to do is just generate a unique ID that's short for this to do. And so this is now good to try out. So whenever I hit enter on this, we're now going to add a to do. So if I hit enter, it's going to add it. Now we don't really see anything, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say down here this dot state dot to dos, and I'm just going to stringify it. So what this is doing is it's turning this array into a string, and then we're just rendering the string here, so that way we can see the value of the state. So here's me typing in some text. I hit enter. You'll now notice we have added a ID, so that's what short ID added. Here's our text that we typed, and the complete is false. Now if I keep typing, I hit enter, you'll notice it keeps our first one, and now we have a second one. And it's added to the beginning of that array. But you'll notice now that we didn't clear the text here every time, so what I'm going to do is after we submit, we're going to say this.setState, and we're going to say text, and just do an empty text field. So now when I type and hit enter, it now empties it, and I can just type whatever I want, and we can generate a bunch of to-dos pretty quickly there. Now the other thing we could do if we wanted to is to add a button to submit this if you want to. And that would just call this handle submit. So we could create a button that's called add to do, and it just calls on click this.handle submit. There we go. And that's the other way. So now I could type, instead of hitting enter, I could add it to do like that. So either way works, so we can keep that button there to do that. Alright, so the next thing is to, instead of just JSON stringify to see our state, to actually render these items. So we've completed this first one, so one is done. Now we're going to move on to actually displaying this array of items. So we talked about in a previous video that we can use the map function. So we're going to say this.state.todos.map. So for each to-do, I'm going to generate a div, and this div is going to have the text. So I'm going to say to-do.text. And we're going to pass in our key, which is going to be to-do.id. So now we can see our to-dos mapped over. So for each to-do that we add, we're now going to render a div. We gave it a unique key with that ID, and then we're going to render just the text of it in a div. So type, hit enter, and if I do this a couple times, we now have a bunch of to-dos added in there. So that's really step 1 and step 2. The next thing is to be able to cross off a to-do. So for this, what I think I'm going to do is actually add my own to-do component here. That way we can add some functionality to it and whatnot. So I'm going to create a new component, which I'm going to call to-do.js. And then for this, I'm going to actually create this as just a function. So I'm going to say export default, and this is going to be a function. And we're going to take some props, and for now we're just going to say div props.text. And we're going to render that. So now in my to-do list, I can actually import that. So import to-do from /to-do. And I'm going to render that right here. So to-do. And instead of passing the text right here, get rid of that. We're just going to render our component and pass in as a prop to-do.text. So now we're going to get no difference over here, and we just need to add React in our scope. So import React from React. So we didn't add any functional difference, but now we're using a separate component to render our to-do. So you can click stuff now. So now we kind of abstracted what that to-do looks like, and now we can pretty much add any styling or whatnot that we want on this that we can do over here. So the next thing that we want to go through is crossing off the to-do, which I said. So to be able to do that, the first step is to be able to pretty much change. There's 2 steps. It's one, displaying the cross off, and the second is actually updating our state. So when our to-do form over here, we said complete is false, so we need to update to the complete is true. So in our to-do over here, we're going to add an on click on our div, and so here we're going to say props.onEdit, or let's say on complete, or I guess we should say toggle complete is the best way to say it. So what I want this to do, and let's drop it to the next line, is so whenever someone clicks on the to-do item, it's going to call a function that gets passed in called toggle complete. So we need to actually add this, and that's what's going to update the state. So over here, I'm going to say toggle complete. And now the thing that I need to pass in here, I also want to pass in, for example, the ID, so I know which one to actually update. So I could say ID is equal to to-do.id. And then in our to-do over here, I can actually pass in that ID if I wanted to. Or I could do it above here. So we don't actually need to pass in the ID if we wanted to, because we have access to that in our array. We could just say right here, and we could say this dot toggle complete. And we're going to just pass in our to-do.id. Okay, so now we can create this function here. So toggle complete. And we're going to get the ID of the to-do. Again, let's just go over what I just added here. So we now have a prop that we're passing, which is a function. So in our to-do over here, this div, whenever I click on the div, it's going to call that function, call that prop, And then we created a lambda function here. And the reason why I used a lambda is because I want to be able to pass in a parameter that's in the map. So the map has a to-do here. I want to pass the ID in so I know which one to actually update. So now here I know which one to update. And so now how do we actually update it? Or how do we toggle the complete of it? So we're going to say this dot state, and we're going to say to-dos, and then we're going to say this dot state dot to-dos dot map. So this, we're going to go one by one through the to-dos, and now we're just going to change the value, or find which value we want to, and update it. So here's how I like to do that. So I like to say if to-do.id is equal to ID. So we're looping through all the to-dos. If we find the one that equals to the one we're supposed to update, we're going to say supposed to update. And why don't we update? There we go. There we go. Spelling is hard. We're supposed to update here if we want to, and whereas otherwise, so if the ID is not equal to it, so if this is not true, that means we don't want to do anything to that to-do, so we're just going to return it and not change any of the values. Otherwise, we want to keep the ID the same, so we're going to say to-do.id. We want to keep the text the same, to-do.text, and we want to change complete. So we're going to say to-do.complete, and we're just going to inverse it. And to inverse it, we're just going to do a not sign in front. So now we're going to update the value of complete there. The other thing with this is we could write this exact same statement in a similar way using the ... syntax we saw up here. So it works for both arrays and objects. So I could say ... to do, comma, because you'll notice we're keeping the ID and the text the exact same. So what this does is it's going to put all the contents of the to do here, and then we're just going to update one of the values, which is complete. So this is going to allow us to keep the same ID, the same text, and then just overwrite the value complete in it. Alright, so now let's see this in action. It's not going to actually do anything now that when I click on it though. So let's add one, add another, and now when I click it, nothing actually visibly happens. And the reason for that is we're not styling anything differently based on the state. But we could do that if we want. So instead of text, I'm just going to pass in the to-do. And inside of this to-do function over here, we can now do stuff. So let's drop this to a new line. And I'm going to say props.todo.text. And now I'm going to conditionally add a class name. So here, and this is one way to do it. We could also update the style if we wanted to. So actually, why don't we do that so we don't have to add a CSS class. So I'm going to say style, and I'm going to say text declaration. So one of the things I can do through this text declaration, I believe it's called line through, is that will actually display a cross off. So let's just look what that looks like. So if I do that, it now looks like there's a crossed off. But notice we added this style to the to-do, and it's permanent, so every single one has it. So we want to only sometimes show it. And the way we know is we're going to say props.complete to-do.complete. So if it's complete, then we want to show a line through. Otherwise, we're just going to do an empty string here. So now, if we render some items here, and now I click on this, when I click it, it's going to update the state. And then when that state gets updated, we're now going to see that the line through is updated. So now I can click on these, and if I click it, it's going to toggle it off. So now we are able to click on items and strike through it. Perfect. So that is the third thing that we needed to do. Next thing is to show the number of active to-dos. So this is a pretty easy one. We can do this at the bottom here. So I'm going to say div active to-dos, or we could say to-dos left, right? The number of them they haven't crossed off yet. And so we're going to say this.state, and we're going to just filter, on to-dos. So I'm going to remove all the to-dos. So filter is a function that goes one by one through the to-dos. And then if it matches this condition, it keeps them. So we're going to say x, or we'll give it a better name, to-do. So if to-do.complete. So we're going to keep all the ones that are not complete yet. and then we're going to say dot length. So now it's going to keep track of there's 0 to-dos left, and if I start adding some, it's going to have more. And now if I cross some off, we now see, all right, if I cross all but one off, we now have only one to-do left to complete today before we're done with all of our to-dos. So that's a little function that we can add, or a little value that we can add. So this is a computed value. So again, we just remove all the to-dos from the list that are not complete, and then we just get the length of them. All right, so next thing is to delete a to-do, or actually we haven't done this yet, so we're gonna add a filter. So I wanna see all of them, or just see the complete ones, or just see the ones that are still left. So let's add a button for that. So let's add some buttons at the bottom here. We're gonna say button, we're gonna say all, we're gonna say active, and we're gonna say complete. And so I'm gonna keep up here the value of what we want to show. So here I'm going to say, I'm going to call it filter, and by default I'm going to say all, or we could say to-dos to show. In this case, we're going to display all of them. That's the default state. And so now instead of mapping through the to-dos, we might say, I'm going to say const, or not const, but let to-dos is equal to an empty array. And then I'm going to say if this dot state dot to-dos to show is equal to all, then we're going to say to-dos is equal to this dot state dot to-dos. Else if, and we can copy this, say else. And now we're going to say if it's equal to active. Now we only want to show the ones that are active. And we can actually copy our condition down here because it's the exact same, this filter right here. Copy that, and we'll put it here. So now we're going to just keep the to-dos that are filtered and keep the ones that are not complete yet. Copy that. And this last one is going to be complete, and that's just going to keep all the ones that are complete, or finished, if you will. So now, instead of mapping through this state.todos, we're going to map through and display this to-dos. So this array right here is what we're going to display. And I can click on this, and I can add items, and nothing changes. But now when I click on these buttons, what I want to do is I want to change the value of to-do.show in the state. And so when we update that in the state, different things are going to happen. So our default is all, so we're going to show all the to-dos. If we change it to active, this is going to happen. So in this case, we're going to filter, and in this case, we're going to filter. So here I'm going to say on click, and we can add a function here, which we just say update to do to show, and we just take a string. So I'm just going to call it s, and then we're going to say this dot set state, and we're going to say to do to show is equal to s. So whatever they pass in, we're just going to update to do dot show. And so here I can say this dot update to do to show, and we're going to say all. And now I can copy this button, and we're going to just paste it in for each one. So copy, paste, and let's move over and see. So now for this one, we're going to say all, for this one, we're going to say active, and for this one, we're going to say complete. All right, so now we're going to update the state when we click those buttons and update what the value of that is. So now let's add some items. So we have a decent amount of items now. So I want to see all the ones that are complete. We see no left. Show me all the ones that are active. Show me all. So now let's start crossing some of these off. So now I can just get rid of the ones that have been crossed off. I can see just the ones that are complete. And now I can still update the state if I want to at this point, and it's going to disappear them from being shown because they are now active, and vice versa, right? So now they're complete. All right, so that's how we can add a filter mechanism and filter through the to-dos. Next one is to add a permanent delete. So if we want to delete those permanently. So let's add that to our to-do. So that's over here. I'm going to add a div here and add that to the bottom. So the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to add a button, which we're going to call X, that the user can now click on. And let's see what that looks like. And I just want to put them side by side. So I can update the style by using this style prop. And I'm going to say display flex. So I'm using Flexbox here. If you're not sure what that is, it's a good thing to learn about. I'm not going to go over all about how it works, but as you can see, what happens here is we can have a little X here. Now it kind of messed them up because they're now all on the side. I'm guessing that's because, so what I like to do is I like to just inspect it because you can actually see the styles here. So if we click on this, we can see that, yes, so if I display flex, it's indeed going to have, it's going to take across the whole screen. So what I can say here is justify content, and say center. And did I spell it wrong? Justify, or maybe it's align items. Oh, I forgot to put a comma. That's why I was like, I thought justify content existed. All right, so let's add that. Awesome. Now their to-dos are centered. So that's what I wanted. So now I can click on this X and I want it to disappear this item and just permanently delete it. So it's not even going to be on the to-do list at all. So now I'm going to add an on click for that. So we're going to have to pass another prop function for that. So I'm going to say props dot delete to do. Or I guess we can just say on delete is what we'll call it. So now on our to-do list over here, when we map over it, here's our map. We need to add it on delete. So this, we're going to have to create another function here. I'm going to say this dot handle delete to do, and we're going to just pass in the ID. So to do dot ID. So let's create this function. Add it up here. So this is going to be the ID, and we're going to say this dot state, and we're going to map over the items. So we're going to say to-dos, and we're going to say this dot state dot to-dos dot filter. So this, we're just going to permanently remove this. So we're just going to straight remove it from the state, and so we're going to say to-do, and we want to keep all the to-dos that are not equal to that ID. So let's go ahead and add some items. And now if I click X, it's going to be permanently deleted. You'll notice they're not complete. That's all the items we're looking at. Now I can still just cross it off, and I can delete those permanently too. So that's how you can permanently delete it, is to actually, instead of just updating the state of the to-do, is just actually remove the to-do from the state, and we're going to filter it out. That's how we're doing that. Alright, so we have 2 items left right here, 7 and 8. So the first is to delete all the ones that are complete. So just to be clear, so what that is I now have 3 items complete, FQA, and this thing down here. So I want to be able to click a button and it deletes all the ones that are complete. So permanently delete those. So that's actually going to be a very similar function to we have here. But now the ones we want to keep are the ones that are not complete. So remove all to-dos that are complete. So what that's going to do is we're going to keep all the to-dos that are complete and the ones that are not complete. And this doesn't take any parameters to it. So let's go back and look at that one more time. So we're removing all the to-dos, remove all to-dos that are complete. So you'll notice I wrote the inverse Boolean statement here, and the reason why is filter keeps the items where this condition is true. So the condition where it's not complete, we're going to keep them, and that's what we're going to keep in our state. Alright, so let's add a button down here, and I guess we can just display it below. Button, remove all complete to-dos. And we're just going to call that function that we made. So on click, this dot, remove all. There we go. So that's our button there. I'm going to add some items, cross them out, and now I want to permanently delete all of those in one click, so I'm going to call remove all complete items, and now you'll notice that just these are left, and let's kill that too. Alright, so that is what's going on there, and now I don't want to display this button here because it's completely useless, because it's not going to be deleting any complete items because we don't have any complete items. So this is where I want to conditionally render this, if there are complete items. So how do we know? Well, we can add a conditional right here and say this.state.todos dot complete, or not dot complete, but dot filter. And now here I want to get all the to-dos that are complete. So to-dos dot complete. So give me all the ones that are complete, and we're going to see if we have a length. And then we're going to render null otherwise. Alright, so we're filtering through our to-dos, and we're seeing if we have any that are complete. So we're checking the length. So it's going to filter, maybe there'll be 1 left, 2 left, 3 left, and we'll get the length of that. If that length exists, then we're going to remove any of that. And we can actually use a better function here instead of filter, but let's first see if this indeed works. So you can see the button is not displayed right here because there's no complete items. And if I add more, still doesn't show up, and doesn't show up till we add this button right here, or till we cross off more than one. So perfect, it works. Now instead of filter, we're going through the entire array. We just need to find at least one. So I think there's one called, I think there's a function called any. Let's see if that exists. No, it doesn't. Maybe sum. There it is. So what sum does is, this is a function, I don't use this too much, but in this case it's pretty helpful. So it's going to loop through the list until this condition is true. So that means if we find at least one that's complete, then we're good. And we don't have to do dot length on that. So again, it's not being displayed right now. As soon as I cross one off, this condition is going to be true, and so it shows it. So the reason why sum is better than filter is because sum will exit early. As soon as we find a complete item, it's done. Alright, that's good there. Conditionally rendering that button, it disappears otherwise. Let's do the last item here to complete our to-do list. So that is a button to toggle all of these to complete, or all of these to not complete. Alright, so let's add it down here. So in this case, let's just add another div down here, I guess. So we're going to create another button, toggle all, and I guess why don't we just create something in our state here. So toggle complete. I guess toggle all complete. And by default, this is going to be true. And so I guess I'm just going to have this go flip-flop back and forth between true and false. So toggle all, and then I'm going to just render this.state.toggle all complete. And so I'm going to say here whether we're going to toggle them all true or false. Did I spell it wrong? It's not displaying, maybe it doesn't display booleans actually. So let's just, I can make this into a string. Or maybe I misspelled it, one of the two. I wanted to say true or false there, okay. So here we're going to toggle all the items complete, so that's going to be true. So let's add an on click for this. And I don't need to create a lambda here. Well, you know what? We could just create a function up there like we have been doing for all the other ones. But we could inline it here if we wanted to as well. So that's something I haven't showed yet. So let's do that. Let's do this.setState here. And we could say to-dos, and we could say this.state.todos. And we're just going to map, and we're going to say to-dos or to-do. And now we're going to keep the value of that to-do, and then complete is equal to this.state.toggle all complete. And then I'm just going to inverse that. So let me get rid of this window so you can see the code. So here we're mapping through the to-dos, and for each one we are just setting complete equal to what the value of this value in the state is. And then we're going to flip-flop it. So now we're going to say toggle all complete is equal to the inverse of it. Alright, so now what I can do is we can enter all these items. And now when I click this, what's going to happen is it's going to set complete all equal to true. So now they're all crossed off. And now if I wanted to, I could make them all false. And then we could just flip-flop back and forth now. And by the way, so this works even if I have some crossed off. So now it makes the remaining ones or I can toggle them all off. So basically I just made like a flip-floppy thing. I don't know if this is actually that useful, but there you go. And that is pretty much the entirety of the to-do list that I wanted to make. Those are all the features. We have pretty good amount of functionality for the to-do list. There's one last thing I would like to mention with this, and that is something I forgot to mention about this.setState that I think is very useful. So notice with this.setState, we are using the state here. So whenever you're using the state inside of this.setState, there's a better way you can do it. So here we're just passing in an object, but what we can actually do is pass a function in. And the reason why you want to use a function here is because the first parameter to the function is the state. So now instead of this.setState or this.state here, I can use the state that's passed as a parameter, like that. So nothing changes here, right? It still works the same way, but now we're getting the values of those from this function. And the reason for that is these set states are asynchronous, so this will give you the correct value of state. So sometimes you can run into some race conditions if you use this.state. So if we had before this.state, so it's better to use the state that is passed in as a function here. So this is the other way you can call this.setState. Pass a function that returns the new value of the state that you want to update. Now you can do that, for example, with some of the ones that we did up here as well. So again, I can say state, pass that in here, and then we can update that. And so this is actually the recommended way I would recommend doing it and what I usually do. So that was something I just forgot to mention. So whenever you're doing that, but for example, right here, we're not using the value of state anywhere. So we're using it here, we're using it here. Here we're not, so there's no need to do that. This one we could add. So we could say state and just add curly braces there. And I think actually it should go, yep, I think it goes there. And there we go. And I think this is the last one that we need to use for that. And now we are using slightly better code for this.setState. So that is it for this to-do list. I hope that was helpful for you guys to see kind of how I would program a to-do list and how all these things that you've been learning come together, and you can build like a little component here or a to-do list. And that's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching.